So first I want to thank Jeff and Chris for inviting me. This is my first one of these events. I'm amazed by the turnout as well. So thank you all very much for having us. And just a little bit, Wright, Finlay Zak. We're a litigation compliance firm focused on the private lending space. I'm in our California office, but we have offices throughout most of the Western United States. And we help our clients, again, with compliance, litigation, and licensing issues there. I'm also general counsel for the CMA, but also want to highlight that there's a little disclaimer up there. Nothing I'm saying here has anything to do with the CMA. Nothing I'm saying it should be relied upon legal advice, even though I know you all want free legal advice. So I'm going to talk about default interest and also forbearances in the context of two recent cases that came out. On the default interest front, there was a case that came out in September of 2022, which kind of changed the landscape. I've talked to a lot of people about this case. I've talked to a lot of groups about this case. This is the first group that's ever had drinks in front of them, so hopefully it'll be far more entertaining than normal. So what is default interest? Many of you know it's an interest rate that's charged on top of the note rate. Often it may be an additional 5%, an additional 2%. I've seen up to 25% default interest. Don't recommend it, but you know what default interest rate is. It's different from a late charge. It can be viewed two different ways. It can be viewed as a permissible purpose, which means that it's allowed and the courts are going to uphold it. In that case, it's designed to compensate the lender for the anticipated additional cost associated with the default. But it can also be deemed an unenforceable penalty, is what we're going to talk about here, which is if the primary purpose is to compel prompt payment through the threat of imposition of charges bearing little or no relationship to the amount of actual loss incurred by the lender. That's a real fine line, because we all know that the reason you're charging default interest or threatening to charge default interest is as a threat in order to get the borrower to come current on the loan. You don't really necessarily want to charge default interest, but you want to get them current, and it's a useful tool to get them current. So it's a real fine line in between what is and what isn't permissible. I mentioned that liquidated damage, or that default interest is a type of liquidated damage provision under our Civil Code section 1671. And I only say that not to get too lawyer on you or get into the weeds, but that's the backdrop to understanding the decision that I'm going to talk about. Okay, so the next two slides, you can skip over that one, because unless I can send out the slide deck to anyone who wants, and if you want to geek out on the 1874 law that started talking about default interest, happy to look at it, happy to talk to you about it. But the main thing what I want here is the second bullet point. So the sum of the case law going into the Honchuru decision, which I'm going to talk about, which came out in September, is that charging default interest on the amount in default is arguably not a liquidated damage provision and does not have to bear a reasonable relationship to the damages that the lender may suffer. So that's really what the courts wanted. They wanted to know that you're charging default interest and that there bears a reasonable relationship